the button. Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Jens Larson and Ken Long with our next session on protreptic coaching. We were warming up with each other as we normally do, with an exchange of pleasantries and commiserating on the human condition and all its glory and all its sadness, the comedy and tragedy of life. And as we were talking through, it was, I think, unconsciously, perhaps, I was moaning and whining about some organizational challenges with values, and then I remembered, oh yeah, that's what our topic was today. Was the proposal that protreptic is something that can be done inside an organization, and so we should consider how to do it well. And like learning to use any power tool, you should respect the ability of the power tool to cause harm in the world. If you're going to use a chainsaw, you should really be mindful of how you use the chainsaw in practice. So, not telling you not to use protreptic in organizations, but if you do, you should know what you're doing and approach it with humility. And I think the Hippocratic Oath comes to mind. First, do no harm, but still take the steps. So I want to welcome my good friend Jens, who's already helped me this morning with my existential problem of living in a world that is less than perfect. So it's always a pleasure to see you, sir, and hope you're doing well. Over to you.
Thank you, Ken. Yeah, I am doing well here in Copenhagen in Denmark. It's afternoon, 4 o'clock, and today, and I have really looked forward to this session, Ken, because it is about how to bring the protreptic inside the organization, or to take this concept that can seems like pretty abstract and not attached from the real world. And for me, working with this, since we did this book here with Ole Fogh Kirkeby and some other good people back in 2008, I think my main goal, and when I teach with this approach for leaders, master educations, it's my goal is to, how can you transform this coaching, you can say, approach tool, ethical coaching tool, and I mean, why people sometimes have a hard time is that the core about the protreptic approach is that we somehow want to explore values, concepts on a more general level, and not using examples from everyday life. And as we have mentioned before, this is about how can we act from values instead of feelings. And that can be a very good thing in the organization. Ken and I have done here for this session a roadmap. You can see it on my left shoulder, and we will go through this roadmap and explore it together. And all of these bullets over here they are about how can you use protreptic dialogue coaching, use it in workshop in your organization. So if you are ready to go, Ken, I don't know if you have something to add to my.
I think this is what it makes this such a bold venture to me, and makes me optimistic, is that we've got to be careful with our enthusiasm for new ideas and things that work for us individually. In the very few times in my life where I've actually figured something out and it went well, and I want to share that with somebody, my urge is always to tell them what to do and how to do it and why they should do it from my point of view. And if I'm a good person, I'm telling the truth. And it's coming from a good intention. And it is designed to try to help the person that I want to see them thrive. I want to help them not make the mistakes I've made. I want them to easily acquire the things that I've worked hard to get, because I want to save them time and trouble. So our natural sense of empathy and sympathy and a desire to do well for others in the world, well, that's not a bad motivation, is it? Isn't that the kind of person I want to be? Yeah, well, yes, because I consulted my checklist of all the things that I value. And I said, yeah, be a good neighbor, be a good citizen, try to help each other, share what you know. So surely the easiest and most efficient way to do that is just tell you what to do. Trust me, I'm trustworthy. Do this thing and everything will be fine. And I actually have evidence that it worked for me. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, everything. And as soon as there's any sign of resistance, oh no, let me just try harder. Let me use true storytelling to try to persuade you to just accept my truth. So not everything that we do that fit for us is necessarily the right thing for everybody else. In fact, when it is, that's almost surprising that it actually does work for other people. So we have to approach this idea of scale and leverage of protreptic, just like every other idea, that a data point of one does not make a theory, does not create universal truth. It can be true in and of itself, but we have to remember that the human condition is dynamic, and yet we can propose that some of the things that work for us as individuals actually can work in a large organization, which has many human qualities about it. It's filled with people. We're doing things for people. So if there is a way that the power of protreptic, which has worked for me as a person, can be applied in a group setting, well, then we should investigate how to do that. And but we should approach it with the same humble inquiry that is mindful of where we are and what we're doing, and explores how it might fit through other people's eyes, and take the time the first time. I'll send it back over to you with this reminder. We say this a lot in the army and in trading and in soccer. There's never enough time to do it right, but there's always enough time to do it again. So I try to remember, yesterday's step number 4, the principle number 4 of timing, is there's something involved in timing that I think we'll see is embedded at a deep level across all of these features of organizations. Each one of these is an opportunity to remember why going slow and steady really does pay off. That's the quickest distance, or the shortest distance between 2 points, is go slow and carefully where the situation leads you. So Sure, that's what I wanted to say. Nevertheless, we're going to try and learn. So here we go.
So, and in that sense, Ken, you have already, entering the first bullet, how to begin, because it is all of us who had worked with how to implement strategy changes. We know that it is really hard. I once saw a survey that 70% of all implementation that we planned to implement inside organization, they actually failed and fail, and that's why it's so important. It's so important to go slow, and another thing is also, both as you said in the last session, we have these eventums. It is important, the awareness of timing, but the core of these eventums, the first one is to be there for the other, and to have this awareness about who are we working with, and in that sense, all of this always begin somehow with stories for me, because when I go into an organization, and if I am coaching people in this protreptic, or I'm gonna do a workshop, it's always first about stories about challenges. So the intro to all these process, when you use the protracted, is to be aware of what kind of stories are there out there, and as you also know, I'm a part of the True Storytelling Institute, so I'm really aware of it, and I think that a good idea is to create this combination, to have awareness for stories, and then also use the protreptic. So for example, if I'm doing a coaching, or it can be a conversation with a person, I very seldom start asking what could be an important value for you to talk about, or what could be an important essential concept to talk about. They always start to share their stories. It can be last week I had a coaching about a CEO from an NGO who had some challenges with her what you call it, her board in this, and she was sharing her story about what was going wrong, and then she said that I really need to improve our relationship. And I asked her, would it be an idea to explore that concept in a protreptic way? So it always began with, I can almost say, a kind of embodied story that people come, because they often need to share it in the beginning. And then we start the protreptic dialogue, and my job is to somehow pull this person up, so she gets some new perspective on what's going on, and very often, I would not say always, but often, this dialogue give people a new perspective on the concept, so they can go back and work with it on a different level somehow. So the whole idea about bringing just a second, Ken. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Can we edit it?
Yeah, it was fine. I paused it in time. We're okay.
Oh, fine. Yeah. So the idea is in the practical world, it often starts with a story if it's a coaching session. Of course, sometimes people want to talk about values or something, but my experience is that you have to be there for the other and then work with the stuff or the stories.
Well, think about the power.
Every stories have concept. There's always
there's a blip in the internet. Well, I'll go back and trim that. Yeah, we're okay. So I wanted to. I was triggered to think of the power of origin stories, whether it's about a people or a culture or a startup, an entrepreneur, and then the story of how it all began and how we met, how I met your mother, and where did we come from, and all of those shaping events that cause us to be where we are. In fact, the power of the original values and purpose is a story, but then that story has some other antagonists and characters that have caused something that we want to work on, the new drama. And that's sort of the backstory. The first story is to be understood as a precondition of going forward, that it's not enough to know just exactly where I am, but the trail that got us to this place is also in that story and as a character in the play. The setting in true storytelling, you speak of the set and the environment, the stage, and all of the conditions. Those are actually part of the play. And we talked about that yesterday too in the session, the individual session, in which the event is not just the place where something is happening, but the place and the time and the feeling also has its own identity and is an actor in the play. It's not a passive canvas. It's an interactive member of that story. And so I see that connection to why stories are so proper to begin with. It's like no matter what else you do, until you have those stories told, the real work cannot even begin. And that reference you made about the 70% failure rates of change management is, from David Cotter's study. And things fail when we do not account for the lived experiences of the people in the situation. So if you want to go fast, you have to start slow. So yeah.
If we and also in that sense, your story, if people tell their story, how did it begin? One of my good friends is the former police chief here in Denmark, and he always said, if you want to explain something very complicated, you need to go back before it became complicated. But in these stories, there are always some values concept underneath. It can be people went into a certain organization or a field because they had a passion for it, and perhaps they have forgotten that passion. So that could also be something to look at. But let's move on to the teams.
Yeah.
And my experience is that if you work with teams and use the protreptic coaching, it can be a session where we, on one hand, are talking about starting perhaps with what is a good team in this context. And
I like that. The formation of a team. Who are you? Where are you from? How'd you get here? Why are you here? So this is not just a collection of individuals accidentally, but there was a purpose that individuals have. There is a purpose and identity that the team is going to represent. It's to be determined. It's to be continued. But there is, in the true storytelling language, it's the ante. It's the upfront payment of the initial investment of I'm giving you my story and my dreams and hopes and being vulnerable with you so that you can see why I want to be here. I want to be, it's not just a group. The team has some collaborative identity. The team is an eventum. It is becoming a player. And so that is the canvas on which the protreptic effort is to be understood. It is a special form of group. It has purpose, identity, group qualities and values to espouse. And then we are members of it to represent that team. And so there is a strong sense of tribal affiliation and identity. Being on the team is part of who I am. And my identity is part of who the team is. So there's a real magical power to the idea of teams. Yeah.
And in that sense, if we have a team and we perhaps start sharing stories about what is a good team, and then in these stories there are come up, different concepts, different values, respect, caring, I don't know, and how to work together. And then we can pick some of these words. Often, if I have a job, I have a kind of a meeting where I talk with some of them. What is it about? And they share these stories, these challenges, and then we agree on, okay, we can talk about these 4 values because they seem to be the most important. And in that sense, as the protreptic, we said, when we are talking about a self is an organization of values. We can talk about a kind of a group self, team self, which is an organization of values. And they are not, like you can say, steady or stable. They are more organic.
Dynamic.
So it's, exactly. So it's important to have these discussion on and on, to have these talks about what does these words mean to us. And it's also a part of this, and it's perhaps the next bullet, diversity that can be both, of course, if we have a team with different cultures, because we need to remember that values is also a part of a certain context somehow. It
Hmm.
can be a way to actually, for the group of these people who may come from different cultures, to explore this
Yeah.
together with them.
Well, I noticed in our diversity workshop in true storytelling the following dynamic, very yin yang, if I may bring in that culture. That in every case where there's human diversity, there is a surprising amount of commonality, which acts as a glue. Every culture has respect and humility and autonomy to some degree. And yet then there are the parts that are dissimilar. And so, which one matters the most? Well, it's both. And it's part of the commonality is the way that we can expand and leverage. The diversity brings in the other perspectives to represent the full dimensionality of life. So I learned in our diversity exploration that what I call level one diversity is when an organization simply meets the legal requirement to be composed of various elements from different groups, and they have complied with the directives of the law. And so it is the value they place on not going to jail, which is being expressed, and then stop. Level two is where we say, oh no, I am actually going to live forward in the spirit of diversity and seek to embrace it for its own sake as a value for its own self. Not because it has a payoff, but because it's the right thing to do. So when an organization can make that transition to a new level of value, unbelievable payoff. Well, that's now level three is where you then realize, oh, not only is that the right thing to do, it's good to do it for our purpose because we get more power and leverage and capacity to do work because we can incorporate all of these other perspectives. So there's levels of diversity that reflect the organization's values and allows us to be like good, better, best. And maybe you have to go through all of those phases. If you started off in an organization at level 0 that does not value diversity whatsoever or opposes it, maybe the first thing you have to do is just, well, I'm going to follow the law because of values. But maybe I can learn to, oh, now I see why diversity is good for its own sake. Now I can see how that adds power to our endeavor. So the slow, steady path through there, the rate of change now becomes an issue inside. Are we accommodating diversity fast enough or properly? Those are all important discussions that we can have about the value of diversity for its own sake, for compliance, or as a way to leverage our larger purpose in life. So all of those things.
Yeah, and in that sense, it can both be from people from different cultures, but it could also be, different people with different kind of educations. I know, from my good friend, the police chief, he needed, because of the new challenges with cyber crime and all kind of things, he needs, to actually create a culture where, police people needed to work work close together with, IT engineering and academia in more human social science, and how can we get these people to talk with each other, and that could also be a part of it, how to bring people together with different.
Yeah, I noticed too that when you embrace diversity and you are proactive in trying to embrace that, the potential for the next item there, the conflict, usually from misunderstanding and bad assumption, or an assumption that's not true. So I've seen some folks try to minimize the conflict or avoid it or control against it, and they don't want to take a risk in order to avoid the conflict. I look at it on the other side, that every moment of conflict, unless fatal, is an opportunity to really deeper understand something that's important enough to have conflict. It's normally an opportunity to have an important discussion about things. And so learning to deal with that, learning like a power tool, this is the area to me where protreptic can offer the most, because a good team will find those areas of conflict in order to resolve them in a healthy way. If we can be healthy and make a stronger bond. If you have a broken bone as an athlete, as you break a bone, when it heals, it's stronger. It's how it responds to stress. So we've got to find ways to bend but not break, to strengthen from engaging with challenges and conflict. So that to me ends up becoming an important value to express, that this is how the team will handle the inevitable conflict that accompanies human engagement. When you're trying to do good things, big things, conflict will emerge as a natural consequence of life. So let's not be afraid of it, but let's manage it and leverage it and resolve it in a way that reflects who we are. That seems to me to be an important foundational concept.
Yeah, and my experience is that sometimes people invite me in to deal with conflicts in teams, and in a way we can say that the protreptic approach is a way to deal with a conflict without pointing fingers at people. But I must admit by experience that if we have a hard conflict, people need to tell their stories in the beginning, so you cannot oppress the shadows, as we have been talked about before. So you need people, I believe, and it can be before we have perhaps a bigger workshop session, but I believe that it can be a way to talk about a conflict without pointing fingers. But very often people need to tell their stories.
Yeah, that was maybe the most important first lesson I received from true storytelling, was you've heard me speak before on the idea of safety, trust, truth, and opportunity. That for me, protreptic represents a way to embrace the opportunity and develop it. But the first precondition was safety, which allows for the venture into the initial story. And if it surfaces conflict and we sense that this is not a safe place, then we've uncovered something very important. And so we've got to be able to back out and say that that's as far as that goes right now. And now we have a chance to reflect. And maybe that's all we should have done the first time. was just sense those boundaries and then have to ensure safety of all the participants. Because remember, they invested into this opportunity to try to resolve things. And so our first obligation as a leader and as a member of a team that cares is to ensure that they have the safety to withdraw without penalty at any time. So we take that risk for them, that no matter what, you can leave here safely. And then the only thing I will say on that is sometimes things happen that must be addressed. And as a coach of young children in soccer, I also have an obligation to the larger society that I don't have the total confidentiality relationship of a priest or a psychologist or a doctor, that when something is in the public space that is a matter of law, the law will be respected. So you actually have to have that precondition as part of the social contract before you enter this area that I propose is safe. You also need to know that it's not unlimited freedom to say anything that will be protected. So some of those entries, this gets back to the how to begin, that one of the ways that you create safety is being very clear on how to withdraw without penalty and what we will not tolerate and what our ground rules are. So that seems to me to be part of the initial engagement, is being upfront about the agreements of the group and if there's any legal or moral and ethical boundaries that this person needs to know. So I think those need to be set.
Yeah, and if it's if we're dealing with conflict, it can also be, I have said this before, that we are working with some schools here in Denmark, and actually to prevent, I don't know if that's the right word, the conflicts coming up, they have these sessions before in the start of the school, so they perhaps have what's a good friendship, what's a good way to work together.
Well, I see the power of true storytelling.
Like that. So that's
when you think about, I remember from the true storytelling process, the idea of restorying and imagining all of the possible outcomes is a way to communicate respect and care. Is that I've considered all the ways this might go, and I've found ways to either manage or protect against unintended harm by the way we have structured the event. The shaping of the event really does matter a lot in order to set conditions that encourage safety, but also trust, so that truth may emerge. And all of those take time and care and effort. This is not some magic button you just push and only good things happen. No, this is because we are proposing to enter areas in which there is already tension or conflict, which is why we're having the discussion, perhaps. Ideally, we could live in a world in which by having, you use protreptic before you need it. Well, then we always need it. A reflective life is always needed. But even more, until it becomes your habit and your culture, the way you jumpstart this is, it may be because it started off with a bad consequence that we're trying to resolve, and then it leads into more of a lifestyle and an attitude. So that is what I wanted to say about conflict. And I am eager to talk about your buzzwords as we approach our return to the station. Surely these are not just buzzwords. These are lived experiences, and everybody will immediately understand that this is different than every other change management proposal that they've ever experienced, which are quite often buzzwords. I'm certain they will instantly detect that this is not about buzzwords. What has been your experience with that? Why is protreptic different? Why isn't this just like Lean and Six Sigma and total quality management and blah, 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 every other buzzword heavy theory? I think there's a hint in how we started. But tell me about buzzwords.
Well, buzzwords, yeah. I think that the protreptic is a way to create a kind of a balance or a integration between your own values and the values or buzzwords of the organization. But it's also a way, if the organization have some buzzwords out there, a way actually to open up for them, so you can see yourself in them in a way. So it's a way to take, I don't know, ownership of these buzzwords. I don't know, it's over the last 10 years a buzzword here in Denmark has been innovation. And every company have had that as every school too, and so a way to actually explore it is to integrate it and I don't know, transform it so it really means something for you. So these buzzwords, they actually get powerful for you.
Yeah.
And I think that the protreptic is actually a approach which can give new life.
Yeah.
Buzzwords.
Value.
So I think the most important thing for me is that this whole idea about how to create a kind of balance between your own values and the organization values, and to, I have said this I think 5 times, but a feeling inside to act from values instead of feelings and pressure and stress and all that. So it's a way to stand in the, I don't know, eye of the hurricane, where there's perhaps silent and calm and could see this complex.
Well, in the middle of a storm, you brace yourself by anchoring to the most important connection to the world, which is through your feet and your center and balance. That's kind of what matters. Don't fall over. I want to conclude this session and really this course with a lighthearted sense of irony associated with buzzwords. Every time that we've talked about protreptic in the last 2 years, and it's been many, we've always started with an apology for the word protreptic. That, we're going to use this word. It comes from the Greek. And David Boji, my hero, always says, that's such a horrible word. It's just nobody. It's the anti-buzzword. And the one thing you can be sure is that protreptic is not going to be a buzzword that is co-opted by marketers and advertisers and repurposed for their own commercial enterprise. And that's actually a feature of the approach, is that it stops and makes you remember how to say it in the Greek just so. It's an act of mindfulness every time I say protreptic, because it's not a natural phrase for me, that automatically raises me to the level of awareness. And why is that important? I'm going to conclude by saying in yesterday's storytelling session at the annual Quantum Storytelling Conference, we saw a deep dive into the literature of organizational storytelling, which was clearly created by David Boji in 1991 and on, and that the first 20 years of organizational storytelling in the grand literature of hundreds of papers was associated with sense making and organizational transformation for the good of the people. But in the last 5 to 10 years, the preponderance of storytelling in organizations has been co-opted as a buzzword by marketers and advertisers who are concerned with their brand and marketing the idea as a magic bullet to solve all your problems quickly with these 3 simple steps. And here's my book and my workshop and all that. And so the sense of storytelling in its original form has now morphed in the public consciousness to one of, oh, it's just rhetoric. And it's just a persuasion technique to achieve my commercial ends and goals without having to be deeply involved at the core of at the value centric level. So if something as pure and holy as storytelling can be so easily and changed into a simple buzzword, that's sort of the human experience with every good idea. Every good idea ends up being used by others that don't understand it, and it takes on its own meaning. So for me, the beauty of the word protreptic is that is the least likely word that I can think of to be turned into a buzzword. It gives me hope that we can still, there's no other buzzwords that you use. It's all method and inquiry and lived experience with where the person is. It's their words. They're not offering buzzwords when they're telling the truth about what they value. They're getting right to the existential center of their life. And by not judging them, by simply helping to illuminate their ideas and dealing with the consequent shadows that we talked about yesterday, there's an opportunity to get to the most important things, those values, and appreciate the feelings that brought us there, but leave with a deeper sense of the values and what they mean at an identity level is the great value that I see in what we're doing. And so I want to, before I hand it over to you, let me just say in public, as I always feel, and what I value the way you make me feel, that I am capable of being a better person if I can remember to take the time and explore. And as a lazy person, what you help me with is you give me the motivation to be better because of the way you treat what I say with seriousness and compassion, but integrity, with a respect for what we're trying to do at all times. And I am a jujitsu player, and so I know the feel of give and take with an honest partner that wants me to get better. So I appreciate that feel, and I place a value on that. And so I want to thank you for this wonderful adventure, and I want to pass it back over to you for further closing remarks so that we can go to our next meeting where they need our help. So thank you so much, my good friend. Over to you.
Thank you, Ken. And it has been a pleasure talking to you. And I think that in the core of the protreptic, you always put a lot of engagement into the conversation. So I have also been here to learn from you. So in that sense, it is both ways. And I just want to share a short story when we actually did this first book, who had this name, Protreptic. Ole, he asked me, Jens, is this the right word for a book? And I must admit today that I told him I think that we should call it philosophical coaching, or coaching about values, but he insisted no, the name should be protreptic.
Yeah.
And today I think he was so right. And I actually one more story about Ole, because I want to pay tribute to him, because he recognized this concept after 2,000 years. I asked him, Ole, how many protreptic sessions should we have before we are enlightened? And he said, he's very cool guy, really generous person. I think 80 sessions, which just 80, which just means like
10,000.
This is a lifelong learning process. The protreptic is something that you should do through your whole life. It can be with friends, it can be coaching. Say, perhaps your kids or your soccer players can, but it has been such a nice experience working with you on these sessions. So thank you a lot, my friend.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to all the future ones. The Chinese are more dramatic than the Danes, and so a Chinese master would have said 10,000, because that's the number. That's the number in China that says, "Oh yeah, it's never ending." So off we go, my friend. I'll see you in Las Cruces, and I'm excited to continue our journey together. And so take good care. Aho.